Hey yo, what is going on guys? Cash and Clean here, and for today's video I just wanted to talk about all of the fun classes you can play in 2024. And at the time of me recording this video, it's currently almost June, so if other characters get released in the near future, then those characters might be fun. I might have to make a separate video for that, but at the moment we just have 18 classes. And I just wanted to talk about some of the fun classes that you guys can play. Now, I'm not going to rank these in order, and I'm not going to talk about like the strongest out of all these. I'll kind of get into like what's good, but I'm just going to mainly go over like which characters are fun, because if you pick a class that you have fun with, you can build their power rank all the way up, and Trove will be a little bit more enjoyable. And if you're more of someone that likes to keep up with the current meta, and you find those characters fun, I'll also talk about those. And since this is like an opinionated topic, I am curious on what you guys think are super fun classes, so drop those down in the comments down below. I'll check that out. And I'm not going to go into any particular order, but to start things off, I'm going to talk about Shadowhunter. Now, this is kind of going to get into like the meta, because Shadowhunter's a pretty good speed farmer, so you can do dungeons pretty efficiently with him because he can shoot through walls. And because he can do that, you can do dungeons a lot more faster, assuming you do have the damage to do so. And overall, Shadowhunter is just like a really fun class. He has a cool little roll ability where you can just pick up some movement speed a little bit extra. So if you do go for that max movement speed build, you can start going really fast, going through dungeons pretty quickly. And he does do a decent amount of damage as long as you do have a somewhat of a damage build with your gems and your gear and all that good stuff. It's honestly just pretty fun doing dungeons through walls. And as far as like his abilities, apart from his roll, you could use his stun ability. It's M5 for me with my current key bindings. So if you're doing a curse skull, for example, you can throw one of those down if you do one shot. If you don't one shot, you don't have to use them because it will get in the way, because if the enemies spawn in like random directions, then you have to shoot them one by one. But if you do one shot, then you can just throw that ability down. It'll one shot all of the enemies in the curse skull. You can even press Q to activate your flask or whatever that is on console. And if you have the martial emblem, then you'll just get that additional damage, so that's pretty good. And yeah, I'm not going to go like super in depth into each character here, but just like the main points that I did want to talk about. So Shadowhunter, super fun class. I do recommend him, especially if you're starting out, because you can do both dungeon farming and boss fights with Shadowhunter, so overall pretty good. Now the next class that I did want to talk about is Tomb Raiser. Now for Tomb Raiser, you're not going to do a whole lot of damage to bosses unless you're fighting in the lower Ubers. But if you're doing delves, for example, you can just spam your minions along the delves if you're doing like 115 to 128, for example. And as long as you do have a decent amount of light, so like maybe 7k light, so as long as you're like one-shotting these things, you can just summon your minions as you rush to the boss room, and you can just have all of your minions just spam all of these abilities, have your minions take care of the enemies, and by the time you make it to the boss room, most of the enemies, if not all of the enemies, will be dead. So basically you're just completing your objective, unless you're doing like a tricky one where it's like monoliths or emptying the entire room. That could be a little bit more time consuming. But if you just have to fight enemies, then it's pretty easy because you just spam your abilities and just rush all the way to the boss. So if you have Pyrodisc, Vampire, and Vanquisher, and then Trailblazing to get that extra bit of movement speed, you're just going to be flying through these delves, so it's super fun. Overall, I do recommend the class. Not the best for bosses, not the best for fighting leviathans, but just for casual farming or just like doing lower delves or, like I said, 115 to 128, then Tomb Raiser is going to be super fun to do this on. It's pretty similar to Draco, but I'm personally not like a super huge fan of him, so I'm not going to include him in this list, but he is similar to Tomb Raiser. So if you do like that class, for example, then you can go ahead and use that class. Although Draco is a little bit better for doing boss fights, I just prefer Tomb Raiser because you can just spam a whole lot of minions and they can kind of just take out the enemies for you. It's pretty nice. And they also take aggro, so you don't have to worry about the boss fighting you. Now, next up on the list, we got Dino Tamer. Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys actually use Dino Tamer. He's pretty good for bosses and pretty good for farming. All you have to do with him is just cycle through your ultimate. So I would highly recommend having the Chronomatic emblem as well as the Arcane emblem. And a cool little trick you can do with them is if you have King Koba, for example, this is one of the Paragon allies. What you could do is just fight a bunch of enemies and it'll lower your cooldown. So if you're fighting a bunch of enemies, then your cooldown will drop, but it does say it's like a chance to reduce the cooldown, so it's not like a guarantee, but it still goes down. So I guess technically you could use that as a substitute for not having Chronomatic emblem, but I would just keep that just in case. An alternative for Chronomatic would be Trailblazing, but while you lower your cooldown, by the time your ultimate runs out, you'll be able to use your ultimate again, so you can use that dino form and just farm whatever you're doing, because he's pretty good for farming in general, like out in the adventure worlds, and he's pretty good in delves because he does a bunch of splash damage. I feel like he's one of those underrated classes. He's pretty fun. I used to use him back when I was pretty new to the game. It's just the only thing that I found annoying about him is if you mistimed your ultimate, you might get stuck in like this really weird animation bug where it kind of looks like you're holding H or whatever that is on console to go to the hub. It's like a mix of praying and like a mix of that. I really have no idea what's going on with that, but if you can get past all of that stuff, then Dino Tamer is a pretty fun class to go to. And a farming class that I made after Dino Tamer was Neon Ninja. So with Neon Ninja, back in the day, this was like your go-to farming class. So if you're an endgame player, this was like the class that like the majority of people would use. His concept is pretty cool. He's a fast little ninja. You can just do backflips. I kind of wish the backflips were more like front flips so you can actually continue the forward momentum, but you have to like constantly, you don't have to constantly look backwards and just keep up the movement speed. You can kind of just backflip once and just continue forward, or you can just turn your camera around. But however you want to farm, it's completely up to you. Overall, he's pretty fast, making him a pretty fun speed farmer. He's not really the best with bosses, and his ultimate kind of sucks. And he doesn't really do a whole lot of damage, so I don't recommend him for boss fights. But if you are just doing some dungeon farming, then I would recommend this class. He is pretty fun. A lot of people tend to just drop all the classes that they're working on and trying to build this Neon Ninja. It's just the only issue with Neon Ninja is that you have to have him built for him to be more effective. Whereas Tomb Raiser, for example, you don't have to be super efficient because your minions can just take all the damage, all the aggro, and you can just kind of be there for supporting damage until you can get that extra bit of damage. With Neon Ninja, you kind of have to tank the damage. You're gonna have to build up your thing for the shuriken, the backflips where you get the ring around you. And sometimes the shuriken can miss, sometimes it just lags, sometimes there's just other reasons. And if you do get to a point where you do a bunch of damage, then you can just kind of swing at the enemies, especially for cursed skulls. He's really good at clearing cursed skulls. Same with Revenant, that's another class that I really like. He's pretty tanky, he has a pretty good life leech ability. He does pretty good damage overall, and for like a tanky kind of class, he's actually pretty fast. So I'm not sure how many of you guys actually farm with Revenant, but this class can go pretty fast. I was actually surprised to see like people farming with him, so I decided to try it out one day, and he's pretty good. It's pretty satisfying once you can get to the point where you can kind of just shield bash the enemies when you're going into dungeons, and then just continue on to the next one. And then if you do a cursed skull, then you can just use your spikes ability and just clear the enemies all around there. It does a ton of damage to them, so not only do you get all of your HP back, but you get to trigger your Pyro Disc or Vampire and Vanquisher or whatever you decide to use with them, and you can just go on to the next dungeon. He's not like super amazing when it comes to Leviathans if you're fighting out in like the adventure worlds, but he is pretty decent, and he's also pretty fun for dungeon farming. And the last class that I'm going to get into is pretty controversial, because I'm not sure how many of you guys actually like this class, but Bard is pretty fun. He has some unique abilities compared to all the other classes where he has like this support type build. You can give yourself and your teammates around you a little buff. So you can do a damage buff, a healing buff, and the cool thing about his buffs is that you could just activate them and then you can swap to another class and you'll have it active for however long it says on the upper left. So if you decide to do some kind of boss fight, you can plan it out with Bard, get all of the buffs that you need, and then you can switch to the class that you want to do the damage with and just kind of carry on with there. If you are fighting Levi's, he's pretty terrible at that because his range is so bad, but it's not the end of the world because you could just buff all of the people around you. I don't think it goes to everyone. I think it's just like the nearest 7 people, but still overall pretty fun class. The only annoying part that most people I think find about him is that when you use your ultimate or you're trying to get all these buffs, you have to go through this random sequence of events where it's like you have to shoot, you have to dive, you have to use this ability, you have to jump over there, and it's like completely random. I feel like they should rework that, but I guess it is what it is. That's kind of how Bard works. That's what makes him a little bit different than all the other characters. But if you do play him a bunch, you can kind of get used to it. So you can kind of focus on the actual dungeon itself if you're dungeon farming, instead of worrying about which ability or which thing that you have to do next. And I do have a pretty unique build for Bard, so if you do want to check that out, I do have a video about talking about building every single class in Trove, and Bard happens to be in there. And I do have timestamps in there, so you can kind of just skip to Bard to see what kind of build I have going on with him. But overall, I think he's a pretty unique class. I'm not sure how many people actually main Bard, but he is out there. Kind of hard to craft. If you do happen to have the credits, or if you're free to play, you can get credit pouches. You can get him from the store, or if you don't mind farming him, then maybe you can just farm him, because I'm pretty sure the main thing you'll need is electrolytic crystals. I forgot all the other resources that you'll need. And I think that's all the classes that I did want to talk about. There are other fun classes. Like you can use Candy Bar with the spin to win ability for the ring effect. But I feel like at that point I'm just going to get into like every single class, which that's not really the point of this video. The classes that I talked about in this video are the ones that I find fun. There are other fun classes, and there are other classes that I do like Ice Age, that I didn't really talk about in this video. But there also isn't really that many classes that I hate in Trove. There's just a couple. But anyway, I'm kind of curious on what you guys think is a fun class. So drop that down in the comments down below, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. But anyway, thank you all so much for listening, watching, viewing, and subscribing, and I will talk to you all later.